welcome, good afternoon everybody to the Meet Business Women Masterclass on how to be a great mentor. I'm Penny Tomlinson, I'm part of the UK and Ireland Meet Business Women Committee. Sorry for those who are disappointed it's not Laura this afternoon, she's joining a bit later, but I'm part of the committee, so I'm very keen to try and introduce this session this afternoon. I'm also MD of Fairfax Meadow Europe Limited, one of the national UK catering butchers. So first of all, we can pass to the next slide, Nikki. You'll see some of the strategic partners that are vital to the future and the workings of Meet Business Women. Many of your organisations will be featured here today, but it's as a result of these strategic partners that we can put on events like this and attract, I think today, over 60 people who are joining in on the session this afternoon. If I could just take to the next slide and just take this opportunity really to, for those of you who aren't members of Meet Business Women, this is one of the key things that we provide, a mentoring portal where you can access this, and it's a free part of the Meet Business Women membership service. So, you know, just take this opportunity really today that it is all about upskilling and taking you through the mentoring service. And we're delighted today that Nikki Taylor from Moy Park is joining us. Nikki has built her career in the agri-food industry and enjoys the dynamic, fast-paced and continually evolving environment this provides. She's head of talent and employee experience at Moy Park and is an advocate and passionate advocate of supporting people, teams and organisations at their best. So we're really privileged and honoured that Nikki is taking time out of her busy schedule for 3 hours masterclass, no pressure Nikki, this afternoon to talk everybody through her experience and her advice to us. So without further ado, I'll pass over to you, Nikki, and good luck, and I hope everybody enjoys the session.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm just going to stop the presentation very briefly just to say hello and welcome, and it's fantastic to see so many people that are here clearly passionate about mentoring. So we've got just under 3 hours this afternoon, and during that time I hope to share some of my experiences and my passion for mentoring, and also as we go along the way hopefully we'll give some top tips, but also give you some time to do some reflections as well as a mentor. As we go through the session, and we're on Teams today, we're just going to recommend that you don't have to keep your cameras on as we go through the session, but we will have some times for questions at the end, and there will be a couple of points through the session as we go through where there'll be potentially a little bit of interaction, and we're going to be using the chat facility in Teams so that we can gauge some views and some comments as we go through. So a very warm welcome, and without further ado, I will get things ready and we will start the session. Okay, so how to be a great mentor, and hopefully as we go through today, you'll get a sense that it's something that I'm really passionate about. And really today is about helping you think about what do you need to keep in mind to maximize the effectiveness of your mentoring. Because we don't just want to be any old mentors, we want to be great mentors and draw such immense satisfaction from knowing that we've made a huge difference to somebody's career and somebody's personal development. And I think mentoring and the opportunity that comes with Meet Business Women is particularly special because it helps us and helps the people that we're mentoring to understand that underlying language, the ways of working and how to be successful in our industry. And when we think about mentoring, it's a process of engagement. We can't mentor without there being a connection, but also it should be a really powerful growth experience, not just for your mentee, but for you as well. And it's grounded in those principles around learning. And the reason why we mentor is about engaging in learning, helping our mentees to explore and discover things in a really safe environment that just honours the integrity and the learning styles and preferences of our mentees. Now, maybe like me, you've spent the last however many months working from home, so it's really difficult for me to work virtually. And I really hope that you know, I'd love to be in a room with a flip chart pen. And as you'll see, you can't take the flip chart out of a girl, and I had to create one today in the best way that I could. But what we're going to look at today is what is being a mentor all about, a little bit about a word of caution. But we're also going to spend some time looking at us and what we do, the mentoring process, something we call the continuum, and some kind of key skills. And as you'll be aware, the session is recorded, so it will be available to you afterwards. But I'd really encourage you to make your own notes as you go throughout, because depending on the level of experience you have with mentoring, some bits of the session may be particularly relevant for you as we go through. So please make something that's going to help you to do that. And as I said earlier, we're going to use that chat facility to put some questions in, gauge some views as we work through the session. So when we think about mentoring, can you think about people that have had a big impact on your career, whether it was formal or informal, or somebody that was a really great role model to you, that you perhaps emulated or you built upon some of the ways and approaches you can do? Because the fantastic thing about mentoring is that it can be very informal, but it can also be more formal. And today we're going to focus on that, the formality around mentoring and what we do. Not that I'm biased, but it is simply great for development. It's sharing knowledge, expertise, and it gives you an opportunity, if you are genuinely interested in supporting someone else's development in a confidential way, but it costs nothing apart from an investment of time. And I think when we think about mentoring, you know, it can be there to help with that longer term career progression. It can be short, medium term. It can integrate someone into a role. It can provide personal development opportunities. And I think when we think about mentoring, what we can use it for is endless, which is why it's so great. And I work with a mentor. I have had a number of different mentors in my career, but it's still something, you know, even at my stage in my career, that I find so valuable. And I meet with my mentor every month. That's about me being able to challenge my thinking and acting as a soundboard. So it is something that really is so rewarding and can transform people's confidence, the performance, and the contribution that they make at work. And we love it so much that we have at Moy Park, we've established an internal mentoring program, which we have about 110 trained mentors now, and almost 80 people engaged in mentoring contracts. And that's everything from being able to chair meetings better, to building confidence, to building careers. So it's so fantastic that you're here this afternoon. But I thought we'd start with a big question, the big why. And actually, what is your real motivation for being a mentor? And I'd just like you just to take a couple of moments and reflect on that. If you've got a pad and a piece of paper handy, jot down what you think is that reason. You know, what is it? What is your why for why you want to be a really great mentor? And then think about what is it that has contributed to you making this decision. So what's your motivation and what's contributed to it? And while you've just had a few moments to reflect and think on that, be grateful if you could, perhaps, if you're happy to share, just pop a couple of things into Teams, into the chat, so that we can get a sense of who is in the room and why you're here. So I'll just give you a couple of moments to think about that, and then to share, if you're comfortable to share, your motivations and why. Because I think when we think about mentoring and why we want to do it, there's got to be that underlying genuine desire to want to make a difference and invest that difference in somebody else. And I've worked with mentoring for a while now. And one story that really sticks in my mind took place about 15, 16 years ago when we set up a mentoring program in the organisation I was working with at that time. And we went to our board and said, we want to introduce some mentoring. We're going to introduce it as part of a leadership development program. And is anybody interested in signing up and getting trained? So everybody went, yes, yeah, I really want to get involved. So we signed everybody up. We went through the training. We talked about the need to be confidential, and the underpinning spirit around mentoring is being able to work with somebody in that very confidential way. And those of you, obviously, that work in a manufacturing type environment will know quite often there can be challenges and positive tensions between different functions, namely finance with the numbers and manufacturing with what they want to do. And we had a manager, a production manager, that really needed to improve the way that he understood the numbers behind what he was doing. So we paired him with a finance director, thinking that would be a really good match and that he would be able to help. And what we became aware of was that one day the finance director went and had a conversation with the production director and went, hey, I know what's been going on here. I know what's going on in your function, really. You can't pull the wool over my eyes anymore because this is what my mentee has told me. Now that, as you can imagine, was definitely not music to my ears, because that fundamental spirit of working with the intent to support the development of somebody else was broken, because it was about the mentee's gain and the use of that information. Now, what we did is we struck off said finance director from our mentoring pool, and he was never allowed to mentor again. And even 2 years later, when he came back and he said, hey, Nikki, you know, can we get caught back up? Can we come back in on this? And we said no, because we can't trust you to work in that way. So I will try not to labour too much on this point, but mentoring is a privilege. It's a privilege to work with somebody. It's a privilege to support their development. So with it comes great responsibility. And that means that we have to work in a very confidential way to be the best great mentors that we can be. And I think we have to also be mindful in the context around mentoring within Meet Business Women, but because it comes with a word of caution. And there are naturally organisations that can be, you know, cross-company mentoring and competitiveness. So really make sure that when you're mentoring, and we clear this really well up front, is that we are mindful around antitrust and anti-competitive nature. So make sure that you operate within that, and make sure that you get some guidance from your company if you are unsure. And I promise this will be the most serious that we get all session, and that will be clearly included within the code of conduct of the details on the Meet Business Women website. The other piece around mentoring, and I'll call out the second legality piece first before we move on and get into the session, is around being mindful of things like GDPR. Because you may be keeping notes and information about your mentee, and you have a responsibility to keep that data and that information safe if you are recording that. So please, if you are keeping details and records, just make sure that you've got somewhere safe and secure to do that. Because I had a horror story once, and I had a meeting with a production manager, and they said, oh, I've done mentoring session today, you know, it's gone really well. And they went off and they went into the factory, and 20 minutes later they came running back saying, Nikki, I made loads of notes and I stuck them in the back of my diary, and I've dropped my diary and now I can't find the notes. So again, a big no-no and a big concern there. So please be so mindful of those two things. But that's the last I'm going to mention around the legalities and the things that we have to watch out. Just keep that to the back of your mind. But we are now going to start getting into some of the detail around mentoring. So this does require everybody to have a go at using the chat facility. So can you just think about that question? What is a mentor, and what are the kind of things that pop into your head? And let's see some of those responses coming through in the chat. So what is a mentor? So perhaps you've had some experience of mentoring before, and you've got some thoughts around what that might be. So again, if you think of anything, pop those into chat. Okay, supporting, listening, sounding board. Absolutely. Great to see that listening's coming through. Yeah, challenge. Yeah, encouragement, really key. Yeah, absolutely willing to give feedback. And I think when we think about feedback in the mentoring context, it's not feedback in the same way a line manager would do, but we certainly need to be able to feed back on some of the ideas and solutions that our mentees are coming back with. So I've put a few here, and a few here we've made earlier. And I think at the crux of that, it's that somebody who supports the development of others. And you've got to have that huge passion to be able to do that. And I think for me, one big standout on here is, how do you create those aha moments for your mentees? How do you really start to unlock that learning and build the confidence for somebody then to go back and to try things out and to do things that are different? So it's fantastic that you're on the right track. And it's really great to see coming up here somebody that you can trust. And that trust piece underpins everything around mentoring. And what you're simply doing is creating a learning partnership, and you're working together with your mentee to agree some mutually agreed goals, and you're focusing on developing your mentee's skills. But they must play an active role in their learning, and how you structure their session can be things that can help you. And your mentee is there to be responsible for sharing their development priorities with you. And then your role is to enable them to become increasingly self-directed in that whole process. So another question for you now, again, using the chat facility. What is mentoring? So what is mentoring? What pops into your head when you think about that? What is mentoring? Yeah, an agreement, relationship. Yeah, creating that safety is really key. Mentoring is trust. Good to see that coming through again. Any other thoughts on then what is mentoring? Yeah, good. Coaching. I'm glad somebody has put coaching in there. We make this really clear when we run the sessions at Moy Park. And there may well be some HR colleagues on the call today, because when we talk about mentoring, it gives us a really great umbrella to be able to share experiences, but also to be able to coach. And one of the key skills that we'll look at later is, to be a really great mentor, you've got to be a really great coach and know when to seamlessly apply those tools. And good to see that we've got some examples here around, the relationship, but also dedicating that time. And simply, when we think about mentoring, it's really the process and that investment of time, transfer of experience, if we're talking about mentoring in its truest form. And a cool thing for me is around listening more and talking less. And when we look at the end around how we can continually improve our mentoring, we'll give you a technique that you can use to be able to join that. So we've had a quick look at what is mentoring, what being a mentor is all about. Now I have my stern dog coming up to say, what isn't mentoring? And I think this is really, really key, because when we mentor, it's not about criticizing what somebody's done. If somebody's tried something and it hasn't worked, it's not about going back saying, well, you should have done it my way. It's about helping them unpick that learning and what they can do differently next time. And a really key thing is to make sure that it's not about you, because we are there giving our time to support our mentees. And it's not about our agendas, it's about their agendas, and we structure and facilitate the process. And I think a really key one today is expecting somebody to do exactly what it was that you did, because we have to be really mindful of generational differences and expectations when we're mentoring as well. And what we don't want to be hearing is, oh, back in my day, this is what we did, because that's not relevant necessarily today. And I think a key thing is, if it's not grounded in learning, it's not mentoring. So we are there to nurture, support, continue to help that growth to really, really go. Now, within the room, we may have, some of you have a lot of experience of mentoring. You may be completely new to mentoring. And I'll particularly share this for anybody that is particularly new to mentoring, because what we don't want to do is for you to feel pressured as a mentor. And you don't have to know everything as a mentor. You don't have to have all the answers and all the ideas, because a couple of tips that we can use is very simply around signposting people to others. So you may have matched with somebody and they want to work with you, but they are then entering into areas where you perhaps feel maybe that's not my strengths, and maybe there's some things that I can do slightly differently. So some good tips that you can use would be around signposting. So what we cover within Moy Park, within our program, is we say, okay, well, if you want to do some learning in that area, who do you know within your business that's really good at X? Or, you know, let the mentee think about that. Who can they approach within their organization to get some further expertise or some ideas or some shared learning? But it may be, if you're mentoring somebody very new within the industry, that you may have people within your network that you know they're really excellent at that. And that's something that you can then signpost to. So don't feel pressured. But the really key thing is then don't then sit there rubbing your hands and think, woohoo, I'm off the hook here because I can palm that information off. It's about bringing that learning back into your session and encouraging that reflection to happen on there. And a really, really key thing that's really important is make sure that we keep the development with the individual. And it's really hard because as human beings, we're programmed to be helpful. Somebody comes to us, they might have a challenge or a development gap. And in our nature, our very nature, we want to be helpful and give them lots of things that they could do that's going to go away and solve it. Now, that really isn't the spirit of mentoring, because we're actually stifling somebody's development if we do that, even though it's really hard. And this is something that I have to work on constantly when I'm mentoring, because I'm quite solutions brain, and somebody mentions something and loads of things pop into my head all the time around, they could do this, what about this, what about that? And what I've had to really learn, and I still have to work on it consciously every time I mentor today, is that I sit down and I prepare myself, and I then literally imagine a massive big rock that's grounding me to my chair, that keeps that energy down, so that I can really consciously work with my mentee on their development. So a lot of you on the call, probably quite helpful, supportive, solutions focused people. So it's about how we manage that expectation. And I think if we, you know, if I give you an example that might help to bring this to life, if I'm being mentored, and let's say, for example, my goal is that I find it really difficult, you know, relationship with my line manager. I find it really difficult to work with them and get my ideas across. I don't, by the way, if anyone from Moy Park's on the call. But I think if I think about that, I'm coming to my mentor with that challenge. And I tell them about it. And then they go, oh, don't worry, Nikki. I know your line manager. I'll go and have a word with them, and we'll help to find a way for you. And I leave that room thinking, fantastic. Somebody's going to solve my problem for me. But the issue is I haven't developed as a result, because I don't then have to face into different approaches and tackle that issue myself, because my development has been stifled. So our role and our job as mentors is to make sure that the mentee comes to us, We support them with their issue, we help them explore it, we help them to commit to actions. And when they leave the room, whether it's in person or it's virtual, they leave with their issue, their solution, and what they're going to put in place to solve it. So just a little watch out there from personal experience. And hopefully that won't be something that you have to come and encounter. But we'll give you some techniques a little bit later on in the session today that can help keep those issues with your mentees. Now, I know that you are all here because you all have something really special that you bring to mentoring, and you've got your own passions that you want to share as well. So this is going to be a reflective exercise and activity for you to work on within the session this afternoon. And I've put on screen, as you can see, a number of different areas that I'd really just like you to think about and perhaps brainstorm on a sheet of paper in front of you. You don't have to cover every single one of those categories, but we are going to give you 15 minutes to complete this activity. So if you want to grab a cup of tea as well, you can, but really do spend some time reflecting on you. And when we come back from this reflection activity, we're going to open up and ask if there's any questions or anything that anybody would like to share during that session. And we'll then have some discussions around why is this reflection on us as mentors so critical to being a really, really great mentor. So hopefully everybody is clear. If anybody has any questions as we go through, but please try not to use this as an opportunity to jump back into emails, which I know the temptation is always there to do. But this is time for you to reflect on you to help you become that great mentor. So we're going to take 15 minutes from now. So take a note of your times, and we will then be straight back online as soon as we need to do. I just need to let Sam back into the meeting, so I just need to put the screen down just for a second with the questions on. Okay, so hopefully you've had the opportunity to consider many of the questions that, or the statements that have been on screen. I just wonder whether we have anybody that's on the call today that would be willing just to come off mute and share your experience of going through that process. It's a first come, first serve basis. So if you'd like to share your views, please feel free just to jump in. But just how did you find that process, thinking about those areas for you? Have we got somebody brave in the room?
Hi there, this is Anne-Marie in Clonee.
Hi, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, like looking at all the taglines there, I often revert to career history and useful anecdotes, and I find them helpful. Is that the kind of thing you were looking for now?
Yeah, it was just how you found, yes, particularly how you found spending time thinking about and reflecting on these areas for you.
Yeah, I don't know, like thinking back on it, I always find them useful when I'm mentoring or when I'm, in a position to mentor somebody.
Yeah.
To put my own experience without actually imparting what I do, not without making it about me, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you for sharing. Okay. When we run this exercise with the teams at Moy Park, one of the common things that people would, first of all, they come back with and they say, oh, I didn't really enjoy that very much because I had to write about me. But hopefully that's not something that everybody's found particularly difficult. But the reason why we've given you so much reflection time within this session is that to be a really great mentor, you've got to be really self-aware and comfortable understanding you and your strengths and where you feel that you can make a difference, because that's so key in being able to put forward the areas that you can support. So you've got to be, really comfortable with being able to do that. And you can add so much richness to your mentoring session, as we heard from Anne-Marie, that she may use anecdotes and stories that to support somebody's development. But there are lots of other things that you can draw upon, and it doesn't have to be work related, where you can share things and examples. We often talk about things like professional body membership, and try to encourage people to think about whether they're members of bodies. You know, when you're mentoring, can it be conversations around encouraging mentees to become part of Meet Business Women, or there are other areas that people can get involved in supporting? Did anybody have any responses that you put down to the best development books that you'd recommend? Anybody happy to come off mute and perhaps share with everybody some great books and reading resources that you've benefited from?
Yeah, I can recommend.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
So I have a book by Amy Morin. It's 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do.
Yeah.
So it just basically advises you how to take back your power, embrace change, face your fears, train your brain for happiness and success. Good tips there.
Excellent. That sounds a great book, and it's not one that I've come across, so I certainly will be making a note of that one as well. Thank you. And has anybody else got anything else they would like to share with the rest of the group as well?
I have one note, sorry, me again. Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Coleman.
Yeah.
I find that, you know, a great inspiration book, and to share because it encourages you to be self-aware.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. And there are so many great resources out there, and what you can bring to make your mentoring really great is to share these and engage your mentee with some of these resources. And it doesn't mean that they have to read all of the book. They could read particular chapters. And I've got somebody that I'm mentoring at the moment, and we're using a book called People Styles at Work, which is a really excellent book around developing communication skills, understanding different styles and preferences. And how we've been structuring our mentoring session is around reading particular chapters of that book that the mentee goes away to do, and then thinks about how they can apply it. And there's questionnaires and things in there. And they found that a really refreshing and quite different way. And what they've now gone on to do is share that book with their team and run that same principle as a book club with their team. So what you're trying to create, those light bulb moments, and really get people taking ownership and it's getting inspired by the various elements of learning that you can bring. And on the subject of books, this is something that has stayed with me for a really, really long time. And when I worked a long time ago now at Samworth Brothers, we introduced a leadership development program. And part of that leadership development program, we introduced an element of reading. And everyone went, but Nikki, we don't read here. We don't, you know, as managers, we don't need to read books. So we really tried to encourage, because we were trying to create this really vibrant learning culture. And I always remember this story because it's about a lady called Deborah, who was one of our laboratory managers. And what we did each session when everybody met for their workshops is we went round the table and everybody talked about what they'd applied on their action plans, what gone well, what they needed to perhaps refine and do differently, and talking about the books they've read and they shared. And we got round to Deborah, and because I used to go and sit in on these sessions, and she looked at me and she went, Nikki, I hate you. And I went, oh, Deborah, that's really strong. Tell me more. What happened? What's happened? And she said, well, you made us read. And I said, I know, but it's such an important part of your development. And she said, well, it made me remember when I was a little girl, I was a bookworm and I was always reading books. And she said, it just crossed my mind that actually, as I've got older, I've stopped reading. And it just reconnected me back with those really pleasurable moments when I was a child. And I said, but Deborah, I'm not feeling the hate. Surely that's a wonderful thing. She went, no, Nikki, just hang on a moment. So she said she went home that night, and because she loved her books as a child, she couldn't throw any of them away. And they were all boxed up in her attic. And she asked her husband to go into the attic and bring down all of the boxes of her childhood books. And she said, I put them all over the floor in my dining room. And then she said, I sat down and I started to open all of these dusty boxes and pick out the book. And she said, I found the book that was my favorite book as a child, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. And I said, but Deborah, I'm still not feeling the hate. Surely that must have been amazing to kind of bring back all those memories and find your favorite book as a child. And she went, no, Nikki, hang on a minute. And then she said, I sat down on the floor and I read the book from cover to cover. And I said, but Deborah, surely that was wonderful. And she said, no, Nikki, I read the book cover to cover, analysing the leadership style of Aslan the Lion. So that always stuck with me. And I just thought it just goes to show that if you create that right environment, learning can come from anywhere and really unexpected places. And I'm going to share with you at the end of the session today some resources and things that you could do, because that will make you a really great mentor if you can infuse that spirit for learning. And we'll also share some things around some websites and some other things that you can go so that you can create actions that give the mentee ownership for further learning outside of the session and encourage them to be really resourceful with their own development as an unintended consequence of the mentoring goals that you're going to be working about. Now, one of the other reasons why we do this activity at Moy Park is that we create mentor profiles for everybody to go through. And this activity helps us to be able to set out what our profiles are. So I'm going to be brave and I'm going to share you mine. So we developed a new format for it. But it's about being able to create a document on a page that then can be matched against areas of expertise where a mentee's goals have. So if we've got somebody looking for perhaps being positive and being creative, then that could be a match, because I may have some things that I could then share with a mentee. But it's also about helping you think about when you go on to the Meet Business Women website and creating profiles. And that's why we said it's so important that you are self-aware. You can set out clearly the areas of expertise where you feel that you can support somebody with. Because remember, we said at the beginning, we're potentially under the umbrella of mentoring. It gives us the go-ahead to be able to share things and put things in, but also then to be able to coach around how we create that pathway for our mentee. So if you don't have a profile for your mentoring, it's a really useful exercise to try to complete one, so you have that clarity when you're stepping into mentoring with Meet Business Women around things that you're really passionate about and what it is that you can do. But we've said a couple of times today that mentoring is absolutely grounded in learning. And I'm going to share a model with you next that I think many of you will be really familiar with. And this is quite a useful model when we think about the context of mentoring, because as mentors, we need to be doing different things and providing different support in different ways at each of those stages. And if we think about that unconscious incompetence stage, you know, our role as a mentor there is to support discovery. You know, who can your mentee gain feedback with? What are the stories, anecdotes and experiences that you've got that you can feed into that lack of awareness to build the awareness up? And a model which we'll have a look at in a minute around the Johari window, it's a really great model that you can use in mentoring that helps to enrich the process that you do. But if you perhaps have a mentee that's at that conscious incompetence stage, you know, our role is about encouraging them to see that learning from mistakes is okay. And actually, it's a really powerful form of learning because there's that emotional connection to it, which helps it to, you know, to stick in our minds. So our role is to be asking lots and lots of questions to deepen the thinking, potentially sharing some knowledge and resources to continue that kind of expansion of the mentee's knowledge. But when we get to that fourth step around the conscious competence, it's really about our role in encouraging the mentee to find those opportunities to practice, 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 so they can really take that learning deeper and really begin to cement it. But you may find, as you're working with mentees over a period of time, that they get to that fourth stage of that unconscious competence. And then again, our role as the mentee changes, because what we then need to be doing is encouraging our mentees to reflect on their practice so that we facilitate that continuous improvement focus, but also watch for signs of complacency. So having an understanding of this model and where a mentee may be on that against their goals can often help us to guide it. And little things like that really help us to kind of get to the crux of the mentoring and make it really, really work. But on the topic of learning, and again, I'm going to share with you some theories. Don't worry, it's not going to be lots and lots of theories, but hopefully some things that will stimulate our thinking around mentoring, is to start thinking about learning styles and preferences that our mentees have. And we're going to have a look at two, or base this around two theories around learning, because it makes sense for us to have an understanding of the preferences to make our mentoring even more effective. So it's really good practice, is a clue for later when there's a question about asking about mentees' preferences and the way they like to learn. But just in case anybody hasn't come across this work before, so this is what we call learning styles, and this was some research that was carried out in the 1980s. And even though it's been around a time, there are still some elements of this that can be really helpful to us when we think about mentoring. And it's all about the preferences and ways that we like to learn. So we may have a preference for an activist, and that means about we learn best by jumping in. You may have come across those people in your career going, no, I don't need to know about that, I just want to get my hands on and have a go. That's quite a good clue that is their learning style. That's how they learn best, and we gravitate to the preferences that we learn best. We may have people that would have what we would call reflectors. So these would be more a passive learning preference, so it's less active, it's more thoughtful, there's a lot going on inside the head, it's very observatory, it's looking at what other people do, thinking about that, taking that on board then before trying. We then have a preference around theorist, and this is around actually people need to understand the why. I'm not going to press that button until you explain to me why and what's going to happen as a result of it. So they need to have that background detail, theory context before the learning is comfortable for them. And then finally, our pragmatist preference. So this is really about that kind of step by step, take a bit, test it out, get everything ready, quite organized. But we'll pick up things and think, right, okay, I know about that, know about this theory, I'm now going to go and put that into practice and test it out. So don't worry too much if you haven't come across this before about remembering all the different names, but we just need to remember, to be a great mentor, that there are lots of different styles around learning. And I came across this picture online, which probably does a much better job than I've done in explaining it, about learning styles in action, and how somebody might learn to swim. So jumping straight in obviously comes with its dangers as well. Reading about swimming technique and practice. Pragmatist has got all the kit and equipment, testing it out, and the reflector is there observing what's going on. And our mentees, when we work with them, will have some preferences to how they like to learn. So there's lots of information online around learning styles that, if it's something of interest, would really encourage you just to have a quick look at it. But really, you just have to have that appreciation and awareness of these styles. So one quick test here before I combine it with another short theory, and then we'll have a look at then how do we apply that in the context of mentoring. So this is where I need a few volunteers to come off mute. So I won't call out, because downside to being on Teams is you can't see, you can't interact and see anybody there. But what I give you this scenario, and then you can decide what you want to do. In that box is my new computer. So I've ordered it, it's arrived at home, it's in my dining room, ready to be set up. If I have a very high preference for an activist learning style, how am I likely to set my computer up? So volunteer to come off mute and say what you think. So I have a very high activist preference. What am I likely to do?
Nikki, it's Emma here. Just plug it in, probably.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm probably going to make a massive mess, pull everything out of the box, and then just test it, plug it. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much, Emma.
And then ask why something's not working.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but my preference is.
And don't read the instructions.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got it. Fantastic. Okay, so let's think about my second preference then. So I have a very high preference for Theorist. So how might I set my new computer up? So anybody else want to come off mute now and give a go with that one?
You'd read the instruction manual obviously first, back, front to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. That computer's not even coming out of the box until I've completely read that manual. Excellent, thank you. Okay, what about a high pragmatist preference? Any thoughts on that?
Potentially open the box and lay everything out and do it step by step.
Perfect, exactly. Yes, it would be everything's going to be out, and when you open the instruction manual and it says here's all part A, part B, it's all going to be neatly put out, and I'm then going to go step by step through the manual, putting everything together. Fantastic. Okay, and final one in the test, reflector. I have very high preference for reflector. How might I set up my new computer?
Would you go and watch somebody else use a computer first to see how they do it and then come back and set your computer up?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So it might be watching somebody else. It might be, I might watch something, for example, on YouTube. Or what I might do is ring up one of my friends and say, hi, it's me. I've got a new computer. You're really good with them. Could you come around and give me a hand to put it up? And then I'd intently watch them as they put that up. So hopefully everybody's got a sense now that we all have different styles and preferences to our learning. And we're just going to have a look in a moment around why that's so important in the context of mentoring. And my last theory, I promise, around learning. And around about the same time, the piece of work was being created by Honey and Mumford on learning styles. Was a guy called Coleman who had this what's called learning cycle and experiential learning. And what he said was, to make learning stick, you've got to have a concrete experience. You've got to be able to reflect on it. You've got to be able to conceptualize it. And then you've got to go and kind of test that kind of concept piece out. But he said you need to go through all of these cycles to make that effective. So when we think about what you can see on screen and what we looked at when we looked at the activist reflective pragmatist theorist piece of work, anybody want to come off mute and see what you can see as commonality between those two pieces of work? Anybody, any thoughts?
Cole's learning cycle uses all of the categories of styles of learning to be a complete cycle.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. And this is why I got quite excited when I looked at these two models in the past, because actually there's 4 stages around Cole, there's 4 stages around learning preferences, and actually we've got quite some clues in the name, because that concrete experience relates to our activist preference. Reflector is our reflective observation, our theorist is that abstract conceptualization, and our pragmatist is that testing out active experimentation. So what we know is to make a mentee's learning that they gain from you really stick, what we need to do is make sure that we take into consideration where they are in that cycle and help them to move around. And to helpfully bring this to life, I'd like to share a story about my son. He's 25 years old now. Every time I tell that I share this story, I send him a message to tell him that I've told him, and he goes, "Oh, Mum." But it hopefully will stick in one piece. And this story goes back to when Alex was really young. And for those of you that have had children, or you know people that have young children, he was at the age where he was still in nappies, but he could begin to understand some communication that I gave him, although he wasn't really at the age where he could communicate back. Now, when Alex was little, he didn't like getting his hands and feet dirty. I assure you, it's very different today. But unfortunately, I was the only mum that did not have a nice footprint or handprint painted picture on my fridge when my son was growing up, because he just used to get so upset about it. So with that in mind, we were living in our old house, and we had an open fire, and we had a coal bucket by the fire, and he's just getting to that mischievous age. And I can remember him and see him in my head now vividly. He was crawling towards the coal bucket. And in my head, I'm like, oh, Alex doesn't like getting dirty. It will upset him. So I said, Alex, don't touch the coal. It's dirty. And he did stop in his tracks and kind of, I think, understand the no part of my message. And then I can remember walking into my kitchen going, oh, woman, you work in development. Come on, this is just not good enough. Get back out there. So I walked back out and I said, Alex, go and get mummy some coal. No, I'm gone. Go and get mummy some coal. So he crawled over. He put his right hand in the coal bucket. And those of you that have touched coal will know what I mean. He squished it around in his hand for a while, sat back on his nappy, dropped the coal in his bucket, looked at his hand, and there's probably about a 5-mile exclusion zone around my house because he was absolutely yelling his head off. But I watched him and I didn't intervene, so please don't report me to anybody, but I just observed him. And eventually he stopped crying. And he sat there and he's bobbing around in his nappy, and he opened up his left hand and I could see his head bobbing from his left to his right hand. And then he took his clean hand and he stuck it in the coal bucket, squidged around with it as he did before, dropped the coal, looked at both of his hands that are now really filthy. There's now a 10-mile exclusion zone around my house. But he stopped within about a minute. And to this day forward, he has never touched the coal bucket again. So what has a story about my son got to do with learning and mentoring? Because if we look at what we can see on the screen, if we think about that concrete experience, what I'd done is I'd taken out that part of his learning and I'd just given him the theory. And I said, don't touch coal, it's dirty. Now, those of you that have young children or know young children will know often that if you give your children the knowledge that they need, does that ever stop them from going to experiment or do the thing that they shouldn't? Probably there's a few heads there shaking, because it doesn't, because children are fantastic natural learners. They guide themselves around this cycle really, really well. And as we mature and develop, we develop stronger preferences because of our experiences. So we don't naturally do it as well as we do when we're learning when we're really, really young. But what I'd done is I'd taken out that experience for him. And what I'd done by then saying, go back and get the coal, I'd given him an experience. He reflected on it, he was thinking about it, he tested it out, and that learning has stuck. So in the context of mentoring, as helpful as it is, when you may have somebody that potentially could be very highly reflective, so would be not so keen on that experiential piece, you may just give them the knowledge and they go, yep, I know everything I need to do about delivering a team brief now. Yep, I know how to structure it. I know what it is to do. Yeah, I've got it. Thank you. That should ring a big alarm bell for us, because to be a really great mentor, we should keep this model in the back of our mind, because what it is that we want to be doing is then encouraging people to go have a go. So if they have those theorist reflector preferences, we need to encourage and nurture more to say, well, actually, where's the next opportunity for you to deliver a team brief? Could you co-deliver it with somebody? And then you'll be ready to deliver on your own. But if you've got people that have those more active preferences, you know, the concrete experience, the activist, the pragmatist approach, Generally, they may not be so keen on understanding the why or giving that reflective practice. So our role changes again as a mentor. So it's really, really helpful when we're thinking about that to understand a little bit about the learning styles and preferences of your mentees. Now, that doesn't mean we have to go, please sit down here and complete this learning styles questionnaires, because we're going to get clues and we're going to get signs by opening up and talking and asking the right question to our mentees. And then we need to think about, how do we adapt our style and preference? And that's where it does truly become all about the mentee to be that great mentor. Because for us, we may have alternative and different styles, but it's about, we go back to this model, where is the mentee's style? Where are they going to enter that cycle? How can we work with them to make it comfortable and build their confidence by entering the action planning activity at that right stage, and then nurture, support, encourage, or help reflect as they go round? So the key thing is, don't worry too much. You don't have to be an expert by any means in learning theory, but it's quite useful to be really thinking about that and asking those questions, especially the very first time you meet your mentees. You know, get them talking about how they like to learn different things, and you'll start to get clues around that. But do take question 2 away with you and keep thinking about that, because it's our role to do the adaptation to make sure we create that right environment to enable the mentee to be able to be at their best. Okay, we're going to move on now from some theory, so some of you may be quite pleased, and we're going to have a little look at the mentoring process itself and just how we structure those mentoring sessions. And as you can see, again, I had to dip into a flip chart for this one because I couldn't keep away from it. I haven't done one for such a long time, just to really explain that process. And we're going to look at how we structure a session, but we're also going to look at then how you handle that very first meeting, because that's really key, but follows a different process. So if I can draw your attention on the screen to the very squiggly line that we can see, and I use this squiggly line to really help me when I first started mentoring to structure my sessions and get them right. And let's assume that the very first meeting has happened, because that's, as we said, a different approach. We're going to start each session with that kind of gentle introduction in. So avoid the tendency, if you're very task focused, to go, right, what is it we're going to get on with today? But do spend time getting to know your mentee. If they open up and share things with you about, I don't know, whether it's football teams or families or things that are going on or things at work, just ease a gentle introduction for a few minutes in. Probably if it's like me, I generally talk about the weather or something like that. But it's just kind of relaxing into that session. And then we talk about the goals. And because it's about the mentee, we should be saying, look, what do you want to cover today? What do you want to work on today? What do you want to use the session for? Because it's the mentee's responsibility to come to you with those clearly defined goals and outcomes, and let them talk through what it is that they want to achieve. Now, sometimes you get a really enthusiastic mentee and they go, I want to look at this, and I want to look at this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this. But really, you've got about an hour in your session to really make a difference to your mentoring process. So sometimes you have to help manage the goal process. Now, that might be, you might have to say things like, you know, well, I can see, you know, there's lots of things that you want to look at, but which 1 or 2 of those things would make the most difference to you now? So help them define the goals it is that they want to work on, and let them talk through and why the goal is important and why they want to work on it. And then the rest of the session is for you to manage that process and establish a really structured conversation. So that's that facilitation phase. And I'll give you some techniques and things that you can use to structure that. And then once you've completed that section, you're then on to actions. So it's things like, from everything we've talked about today, what is going to be the 1, 2, or 3 things that you're going to take away with you and commit to? So you give that time within the session for action planning. And sometimes, again, very enthusiastic mentee will go, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And again, our role as great mentors is to help manage those expectations And if that happens to you, because sometimes a mentee's, thinking, if they have particular preference for extroversion, their brain's going to be going off in all different directions and talking through lots of ideas. We just bring it back in with, what are going to be the one or two things that are going to make a difference. And then off we go. And then the mentee is there putting into practice to then come back to your next session, to then review the goals, the progress with the goals, and then to review the actions for the next session. So really, really simply, that is the mentoring process and how we structure those sessions. We always say around about an hour, but don't fret. Sometimes you can do a mentoring session and it comes to a natural conclusion in 20 minutes. I had one the other day. We had an hour booked. 25 minutes later, we kind of covered everything. And, you get a sense of, we could do more, but we just asked that, is that a good time to conclude today's session, or do you want to use that time for anything else? So we'll go into some bit of detail and hopefully share a few hints and tips with you on that process as well. But I thought we'd just jump very much, first of all, to how we would handle that very first meeting with the mentee, because it is that one critical time when you're coming together for the first time, you don't know each other, you're probably working through Business Women in different organisations, so you've got to take that time without diving into the detail to really know who you are. So a few ideas around things that you could cover at that very first meeting. So when we talk about get to know each other, we'd really recommend that you go first. Because if you have somebody that's not particularly confident and you say, tell me about you, they don't really know potentially how far to go and what to do. So it's really great that you tell them a little bit about you first and kind of set a map out for what they want to cover. It's really useful to ask that question in green about the experience the mentee has. You may be mentoring somebody that's come, fresh from education. And I think it's really important to ask, because a lot of education establishments now would have mentee programs and mentor programs, but they may be quite different in structure and purpose to what we run within our organisations, or indeed, like at Moy Park, we would have our own mentoring program, but you might be doing things differently. So it's a good question to ask. Obviously, things around the Meet Business Women sort of code of conduct, the legal boundaries, be really mindful of that. And there again, I promised I wouldn't mention it, but I'll just slip that in one more time. Thinking about, talking about learning from mistakes is great. So you help that process go really, really easily as well. There may be many other things that you feel are the right things to want to do, but it's really good if you build perhaps a checklist of things that you want to cover, talk about mentoring styles. I like to ask that question with a new mentee, and I say to them, on a spectrum of, being challenging and demanding versus patient and nurturing, what style would you feel that I could demonstrate to you that would help you the most? So again, really make sure it is the mentee is the centre of everything it is that we're going to do. Yes, by all means, talk about the goals. But there will be other things, don't avoid the temptation, I guess is what I'm saying, to step in and start solving everything and trying to think of them, but get them to talk about the goals in a bit more detail. So that's your first session out of the way. But if we go back to that squiggly line and think about coaching and mentoring, and this is what we call the continuum. And this is that facilitation phase that you're going to be working through. And put in its simplest form, if you are purely mentoring, all you are doing is pouring in information, knowledge that isn't there already and passing on your expertise and your experience. That's pure mentoring. And it's great that we have the ability to be able to do that, because as we said, it's the spirit of learning. But what is going to make you into a really great mentor is if you combine that pure mentoring with some pure coaching, where all you are doing is drawing out and facilitating your mentee to create that blueprint in their own mind. And actually, If you run a mentoring session and it was just for pure coaching, fantastic. Don't worry about that. You've probably done a great job. But having that mentoring umbrella enables you to move seamlessly between the two areas. And some clues that you might come across, you know, might be what thoughts and ideas have you got about how you might tackle that. But if your mentee does not have any of those ideas, then you can perhaps sprinkle in some examples, some stories and things for them to consider. But the really key thing is then you flick back over to that pure coaching side and say, okay, is there anything that we've talked about that you think you might be able to build on for your own situation? And get them then drawing out, using that new knowledge and facilitate discovery. So if I had a flip chart in front of me, I'd probably be drawing a squiggly line between both sides of that. So do keep that continuing in mind, because those are the sorts of things that are really, really going to help you make the difference. If we stay on that pure mentoring side, it's going to come with some pitfalls, unfortunately. So can anybody pop into the chat facility? Just have a think about, if you only stay in your facilitation stage on pure mentoring, what are going to be the things that might be pitfalls? What are the things that you're not going to achieve? Yeah, it can become about you. Yeah, we're stifling that development for the mentee. Yeah, we don't allow it to take place. Okay. Any other thoughts? So I think we've got the kind of the key crux around that there, because what we're taking away is that development and that accountability. And we just stifle development because it's really easy to go away with some information. And interestingly, you might be sitting there thinking around, it says blame down there at the bottom and creating dependency. And if we just mentor, this is an example of what can happen. So let's just go back to that scenario that wasn't real that I said earlier about I need to work on my relationship with my line manager. So if I go to my mentor and they go, okay, Nikki, maybe you should go and do this. So I go and I do exactly what they've told me to do, and oh, great, it worked. Now I've got another issue. What am I going to do? I go to my mentor because it's nice and easy. So I then kind of create this dependency, and I go back and say, well, I've got this issue now. You know, what do you think I should do? And they give me the answer and I go away and I do it. But eventually, because the mentee's not in my shoes, I might go to my mentor and say, now I've got this issue. And they go, well, do that. And I go do it. And it doesn't work. And I come back and say, well, you're not a very good mentor, are you? So we want to avoid that at all costs. So if we flick to that pure coaching side of the model, can somebody or a few people pop into chat? What are the benefits? What are the prizes if we operate on that side of the model? So if we operate from the pure coaching side, what are the things that we're going to get? Yeah, absolutely. Accountability, top of the list. Yeah, self-awareness, encouraging that self-sustaining piece because they're finding the solutions themselves. Fantastic. So we will talk about 4 big prizes. Yeah, confidence, great to see that coming through. Yes, the mentee takes accountability. Yes, it helps to build their confidence. They can master the skills that they need to do, or the things that they need to do to work on better. And it creates that self-sustaining piece, because by applying the coaching skills, we're getting everybody thinking. And then the next time that problem goes there, you're training the brain and the thought process in the neural pathways to keep thinking in that coaching way. So please don't take from what you can see in front of you that mentoring is a bad thing, because it's absolutely not. But what we need to do to make it really great is make sure that we apply those coaching skills between there, because there will be lots of times that we have to pour in experience and use anecdotes and pass on knowledge and information. But we just make sure in the session that we draw it out and help them create that blueprint. So just to give you a couple of ideas before we go for a quick break, on screen, there are some sort of phrases and questions that you can use on here again, and they're sort of probably the more pink questions and more some of the coaching questions. The purple, as you probably guessed by now, are more that sort of on that mentoring side, and how you sprinkle in those examples and experiences. And it's okay as the mentor to help the mentee take a little bit of time. You know, you could, if you look at that sort of one at the top in purple, you know, look, if you get a sense of, just scratch the surface, let's build some reflection time, let's discuss it next time, because as the mentor, you own the process as you go through, whereas the mentee owns the development. So it's 3:30. We're going to stop for a break now. So if we could meet back here at 3:45, and then we're just going to look a little bit about Johari window, and then I'll just take you through some hints and tips on the structuring of the session, and then we'll end on a few creative things and resources that we can go. If anybody has any questions during the break, please feel free to pop them into chat. Thank you. So welcome back. Hope you're feeling nice and refreshed. We said that we would now move on to have a quick look at the Johari window. So I'm just going to share this with you. Model. Don't worry, it looks a little bit complicated on the screen, but I think this is something that's quite useful to think about, particularly around our role within the mentoring process. And again, if it's something of interest to you in mentoring, you can go online and you can actually get questionnaires and things that you can work on that help you to sort of plot where a mentee might be. And it might be something that you want them to particularly explore. And we've started to use this model quite a lot at Moy Park. We found it really helpful about building that self-awareness piece. So it's really a simple model. I'm sure many of you have come across this before. But it's all about what you know about yourself or you don't, and what's then known to others and unknown to others. And if we think about that point number one, so these are things that I know about me and that other people might know about me, but I also may have things that I decide to keep private from you. And the only way that I can increase that there is to start to share and to be comfortable to self-disclose. It could be about how I'm really feeling about something and I keep that hidden, but because I keep it hidden, it may stifle my development because I'm not tackling it. But where we find it really useful is that point two around the blind spot. It's quite often, and we talked about earlier about us being really self-aware when we're mentoring, but it's also fantastic to help our mentees develop that self-awareness as well. And they may have things that they do that they're just not aware. It could be a tick when they're presenting, for example. It could be, you know, just something that they're not aware around the impact that they may have in their communication with somebody. So it's quite helpful if that's not known to be able to then provide feedback or create opportunities for your mentees to gain feedback so that they can become more self-aware and then put things in place to address it. But the real beauty of this model from this perspective of when we are in the mentoring coaching context is that box 4. And this is where you start to unlock the potential of your mentees, because currently it's things that perhaps I don't know that I have the capability to do and somebody else doesn't either. But hey, through the process of mentoring, you can create things and opportunities for me to go try and do things that are new and different. So we start to bring that box 1 as broad and as wide as we can. And I think, as I said, it's just a useful thing to keep in the back of your mind. But if you're working with somebody and they don't have the self-awareness, that is going to impact on their ability then to make some sustainable change, because perhaps they don't see that. So that's quite, as I said, quite useful, something that you might want to think about in the context of mentoring. But we're going back now to the piece around that. Remember that squiggly line that we drew? This is where we get to the end of the facilitation part of the session. And there's been a lot of idea generation There might be some talking through how that's going to happen. But now we need to think about how do we best help our mentees to wrap up that session really well so it leads to success. Because there's nothing more deflating as a mentor when you agree with your mentee agrees lots of actions and then they come back and they haven't done anything. So we need to set everybody up for success. Really try not to get any more than 1 or 2 core actions out of every single session that you've got. One of the things that that we use is around this 1 to 10 scoring. So if I have an action that I'm actually going to step in and deliver a team briefing, that's my action and that's what I want to do really, really well. If you were my mentor, you would be saying to me, okay, Nikki, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you're going to put that into practice and actually create an opportunity to do a team brief? And I might go, good question, maybe about a 7. Unless your mentee says anything else than 10, follow it up with some more questions. So what would need to happen to get that from a 7 to a 10? Let's talk about that now before we leave the session. And again, little things like that and techniques like that can really help to set the mentee up for success as well. And we talked a little bit before around multiple actions. So, you know, just try to kind of wheedle it down to 1 or 2 you commit to on paper. Now, one really useful thing to get your mentees to do is to build 5 minutes into the end of your session. And in that 5 minutes, ask them to reflect on the session. It might be that you could ask them to draw a mind map or just to make some notes and talk about what they've kind of thought, what they've learned about themselves, what new ideas and thinking, new knowledge, and also what their actions are. And then when you've done that, reconvene in the session. And if you then ask your mentee, can they take a photo of that and share it with you? Then you've got a really great record of what went on in that meeting. And you haven't got to worry about taking notes as you go through, because sometimes that can be distracting in the session that you're running. And what you've got is everything that was in the mentee's head. And then it's really good practice that the next time you meet that mentee, 5 minutes before yourself, open it up and review that mind map or those notes that your mentee has sent you, because that will reground you into what you were covering before, and it will then lead you into making that session really, really great because you are completely aware of all the things that will happen. So that's something that you can do. And we talked a little bit about keeping notes and keeping notes safe. That's quite a key point, and I'm not going to go down the legal route again, but using things like OneNote, if you have that, you can have tabs for each mentee, and you could put your own reflections in there, and you could also add the pictures in, so you keep it nice and secure in a computerized system that you can do on there. If you get back to a position where you're able to mentor face to face, a really good tip for your own development, and it's painful as it is, as I speak from experience, but you can actually go into OneNote and video your session with your mentee's permission, and then you can watch it back and you can see how you're coming across, and you learn so much about your style and things that you perhaps do well and things that you want to do differently. And I found that a really great learning process, even though I don't really like watching myself back. But I realized that every time my mentee was talking to me, I was in my head, I was coming up with ideas. I was trying really hard to remember the rock thing to ground me in the chair. Even with that, as soon as they were talking, I was leaning forward, and my non-verbal communication was kind of really giving things away. And I could see firsthand the impact of that on the mentoring sessions. And that helped to build, I think that's Johari window, that helped something in my blind spot that I never would have seen. So it's really good to keep that continuous improvement piece up for your own mentoring, as well as improving the experience for your mentee. So we're going to have a little activity now, just to aim to pull everything that we've talked about together around coaching and mentoring before we move on, just to touch on a few of the skills and a few different techniques. So it's called My Messy Drawer. So that just imagine that is a photo of my desk drawer. And again, would like to offer the opportunity for anybody listening to come off mute. But let's just think back to that continuum model that we looked at before. If I wanted a messy drawer mentor, and my goal was to be able to have a tidy drawer, only mentoring me in its purest form, how would you approach that conversation with me? Is there anybody that's happy to have a go, but we're just purely mentoring? How would you tackle that? And you can't ask me what's in the drawer, because there's something that I have no idea what it looks like on the left-hand side above the heart card.
I think I will approach by asking something from the draw and see how long it will take to get it.
So tell me a little bit more.
So, for example, if we are on mentoring session and mentee opens the drawer looking for pencil,
yes,
I won't say anything about how messy it is.
Yes.
Instead, I would ask them to find something for myself from the drawer, and then we can discuss how quick he can find it and see if there's anything we can do differently or change around, and what mentee thinks what can be improved.
Yeah, so what you're talking about there is, so you're starting to coach me at that point, because we're asking some questions and we're really making me think. So that would be some coaching approaches. But if we were just going to purely mentor, so with the mentoring piece on the continuum, it's about pushing new information in, because I'm not very good. I don't have any ideas about how I can tidy my drawer. So any thoughts on some phrases or what we could say that's not a question to purely mentor? Any thoughts? Could be from any thoughts.
Probably make reference to the messy drawer and oh, I don't know, about, you know, is that something that they find helps them to have, you know, a part of their workday in chaos? Well, chaos without trying to accuse them of being chaotic, but does that suit them when other parts of their day would be more organised?
Yeah, so again, we're stepping into the coaching piece.
Yeah,
You're asking the question, so that's great, because that's really making me think about the impact that that's having. The current reality of my message drawer on me, that's coming through coaching. So
the message drawer might just suit that person.
It may well suit the person, but let's assume my goal is that it's driving me mad. I'd really like to have a tidy drawer, but I don't really know how to go about it.
Yes.
We think about mentoring in its purest form enables anybody to share their own ideas and experiences, or to push information in that's new that the mentee doesn't have already. So it's going to be more around phrases or telling or sharing rather than systems.
Sorry, Nikki, I think I just have to get in there and tidy it up. It's actually making me feel uncomfortable just looking at the picture.
Yeah, do you know, it makes me feel uncomfortable too every time I look at it.
Hi, Nikki. It's Jen from KeyPack.
Hi, Jen.
I suppose if you're saying, one of the examples you could say is, look, I remember a time when my desk looked like X, and some of the things that I tried was Y. So you kind of saying, look, I've had that experience before, and this is the how I approached it.
Yeah, spot on. So that's a great example of purist mentoring. So you're sharing, you know, so I've had this situation before, and this is what I did. I took everything out. I took, you know, put these things in this order, threw everything away that wasn't, you know, that was out of date or was broken. So that's purist mentoring. So that's the technique. If the mentee has no prior experience, no knowledge, no learning, they don't have it in there that they can draw out. But then what we're going to do to make the mentoring really great is we're going to share the ideas with them, and then flick to that other side of the continuum and then say something like, okay, so from what we've talked about, what do any of those things look like that might be helpful to you? If so, which one? Talk me through how you're going to do it. Great example. Let's assume then that I want to tidy my messy drawer, but I do know how to tidy my drawer and I do know how to keep it tidy. So I want just a purist coach. Somebody come on and give me 1 or 2 really good coaching questions that are going to help me sort that out. Anybody wants to come and ask a question? What's going to get me thinking in my own head about what I need to do to take ownership for my messy drawer?
Maybe about motivations and blockers for what might motivate them to have a clean drawer and what might be preventing them.
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, so you're really getting underneath there. And somebody else did somebody else have another question?
Sorry, Nikki, I was going to ask them how they thought that perhaps having a tidy drawer might help them be more effective in their day-to-day job.
Yeah, good question, because you're already making, my head's already thinking of the answer to your question. So that's great. So what we've looked at is this combination of pushing information in if it's not there, but flicking over to coaching if it is, and using coaching in its purest form only if the mentee has that information on there as well. Normally when we do this exercise in a face-to-face situation, I have a kitchen drawer at home, as I'm sure some of you may have the same, that's just full of everything that's completely random. And I, without auditing that or sifting anything, I normally then tip it out on the table and everyone has great fun thinking I've got, I don't know, menus from 2003 in there for the takeaway. So it's a bit more fun when you can do it in person, but hopefully we've taken from that and sort of summed up everything around the mentoring and coaching. But the key message is flick between that continuum. So hopefully by now we've got the structure, we've got the process, we've got some top tips to make great mentoring. It's just time to sort of take it in a little bit now, thinking more around us as mentoring and what we bring. And I think when we think about the skills of being a mentor, and we've also talked about you've got to have some coaching skills. You know, you've got to be able to do lots of things and listen and reflect and encourage and nurture. But can we just see in chat, if you were going to think about yourself, what have you got within your toolkit from a skills perspective that's going to make you a great mentor? So it's kind of time to be comfortable with strengths, but let's just see, because they will help to spark some thinking around other examples. So pop into chat if you're comfortable to do so. Let's see what skills everybody has. And I'll share my 3 favourite as well. I've done that. Okay, so what are the 3 critical skills you have? Great, being open with experiences of failure is really key. Yeah, listening, empathy coming through. Great skills and qualities for mentors. Anything else? Anybody got any others to add? Yeah, the female perspective on the industry experience. Fantastic, thank you. Day to day, yeah. Communication, forward thinking. Yeah, humility, and that plays a really key role, and that discipline around meeting commitments. And this is something that I would really encourage you to keep reflecting on and keep being really comfortable about the things that you bring. Okay, great. We've got some more active listening. Absolutely is so key. That's one of my favorites as well. Okay. So I said I'd share mine. So active listening, and I was working with somebody, I was training some mentors once in another organisation, and we'd done a practical activity around listening. And this lady turned to me and she said, so Nikki, what you're saying is that when you're mentoring, you have to give somebody exquisite attention. And I was like, wow, that phrase really stuck with me. And I try to applaud that within my sessions, to think, you know, you are just there for that hour. Nothing else is more important than the person that you are mentoring. So get rid of all those distractions and listen. I keep asking myself this: am I asking the right questions? And being able to formulate those coaching questions as you're going through the session, and actually you're listening for what isn't being said, you're asking the right questions, and then that piece around encouragement, around building that confidence and things to do more of. And as we said, you know, you could be helping the goal setting process, supporting the problem solving process, supporting reflecting, valuing differences, facilitating, encouraging, all of these many skills that you can apply as a mentor. And this is just really a question for you to reflect on around what are the 3 critical skills that you could develop further that would make you a great mentor. So we're not asking anybody to share this, but just to take a minute, just to think about what could you dial up more to make you a really great mentor. I'll just give you a minute just to have a think about that, and be fantastic if you could write that down and make a commitment to yourself about areas that you would like to develop. So hopefully you've got your 3 skills, and do, as I said, take those with you and think about what you can do to continue to hone them. I just wanted to share with you this document that I came across on the internet. You can see there's a little bit of it that I didn't quite like, so I crossed it out. But I thought this for me was a really good aid memoir around you know, mentoring and the process and what you can do, and some of those attributes that make a really, really great mentor. And I thought the reason that I put this up is to really also highlight one thing from the Did You Know section, which is about reverse mentoring, because we're seeing a lot more of this start to happen at the moment now. And it's something that we are trying to encourage within Moy Park by taking some of our early careers employees and team members and give them opportunities to be sharing with our leaders and our executive team some of the challenges and things that they need to know and be aware of coming from those different generational gaps. So if you're interested in something like that, reverse mentoring is really, really good. I worked with it about 15 years ago, pairing up team members and operators that were working within the factory environment with production directors, so they could really talk about kind of their experience and what it's like. And that's really quite powerful. It just flips the traditional view around mentoring. And again, that could be something that you could explore as well, which is quite interesting. Now, I know most organizations, you will have a set of values that you work with. And I think particularly whether you're mentoring internally or externally through Meet Business Women, that we have a responsibility as mentors to make sure that we take those values into our thinking and into our sessions. And if you can get your mentees talking about perhaps what are the values that they are expected to live, or what are the behaviours that are key within their own workplaces, it takes you from good to great when you then start to explore an action planning stage. If you were to take this value and apply that lens to their action, does that feel congruent? Does it match up, or does it not do that? So you can see Moy Park's values on screen now. So what we've been encouraging our mentors to do is to say, for example, okay, so you've talked about some options. If you were to apply the humility lens to that, how does that stack up? Or if you were to dial up the humility, or if you were to dial up the simplicity, what other ideas and thoughts have you now got so it's in line? So I would really encourage you to explore the values of the company that your mentees are coming from through the Meet Business Women programme, because again, that really helps to make sure that there's a great fit between how you're preparing your mentees and then how they need to go back into their work context or their work environment. And then we said we'd share with you a few of the resources that you could use to enhance your mentoring. So we had a good conversation, and thanks for putting some book titles into the chat there. So I can't stress enough, maybe because I don't know, maybe because I like learning, but how things like this can really enrich your mentoring. And there's the People Styles at Work book that we mentioned before. So we've been looking quite a lot of career coaching. We've got a resource library that we have at Moy Park, so we can. It's really easy for team members then to access books and resources they can use. But think about what you've got. If you haven't read for a while, now's a great time to start thinking about it, because there really are some fantastic resources that you can engage with. And actually, it's quite fun to work through something like that together. With your mentee, taking out the elements of the book and things that you can do as well. We talked a little bit about perhaps tapping into anecdotes. I'm a real fan of the work of Bree Brown, who I'm sure many of you will have come across before, who talks a lot about vulnerability and courage within leadership, and she's done some fantastic work. And I'm finding more and more often now that I'm signposting mentees to have a look at some of her work and her thinking to help build the confidence and to be more courageous in terms of how open they are, perhaps about how they're feeling about things like that. So you can kind of pinpoint to, you may have other people that you really rate as well. A website you may have come across before is called businessballs.com. If you haven't heard it or used it, it's fantastic. Every single model, theory, test, tool, quiz is on there with loads and loads of narrative. So if, for example, you were working with somebody to support their better time management, Business Balls is a great place to send them to have a look at and see what tools and resources and research resonates with them on there as well. And then I'm sure many of you, or probably everybody on the call, is familiar with TED Talks. And again, we've started to introduce things like this into mentoring, and again, can shift the dial, taking you from good to a great mentor if you can then signpost or ask your mentees to go do some research around things that you're doing. But something that we've been using more and more of now, and actually is really quite fun, is the use of different coaching cards within your mentoring sessions. So you can have cards about your strengths. We've got cards about building emotional social intelligence, coaching cards for teams, for leaders, all manner of different areas. And again, you can get them they're fairly cheap to buy packs of these online. But what we've started to see happening more and more is that, we get a card deck and we can randomly, you could do this even virtually, shuffle the card deck and pick 3 questions out from that card deck during a mentor session. And they can be quite random, but actually what it leads to is some added value, discussion and conversation. So again, something there, if you don't use those sorts of tools already within your session, can really start to make a difference as well. And they're quite good fun. You can get career coaching cards. You could get mentees, if you're mentoring them around career coaching, they could go and, they could go purchase some and work through that and then come back in there for you, unless they've got those already available within their own organisations. And then I thought I'd share something with you that's perhaps a little bit creative. And the good news is, as you can probably see from what's on screen, is there are lots of these what we call timelines or personal journeys that you can get templates of free online. And it's quite a good way to bring a slightly different context. So you could use these to help your mentee set out their career journey from where they are now and leave some at the blank, leave some blank at the top for what they want to fill in. You could ask them to create a personal journey that's a little bit creative and different when you're doing your mentoring sessions. So, if we've got 6 sessions, what do we do at each stage in the roadmap? What's changed? What's moving forward? And it acts as a really good aid memoir at the end of it. And often when you mentor, you don't often get to know and see the end result of what you do, because often you're working, separate away in a room or an office somewhere with somebody. So it's really great for you to know that you've done a fantastic job because somebody's been able to build things. And little things like this can just add a real difference and bring a different approach to your mentoring. So that's great. You've become fantastic. You've been a great mentor, but it just doesn't ever stop there. And I think what makes us a great mentor is that all of us need to continually reflect and adopt that continuous improvement piece to our mentoring. So a good thing that you can apply to, if you don't want to step straight in and do a video of your session, which I don't blame you if you don't want to do, is when you finish a session, draw a circle like that on the screen, on a bit of paper, and then just ask yourself some of these questions. What percentage of time was I talking? How much did the mentee do? And do it as a little pie, a pie chart. What can you learn from that? Because unlike I'm doing today, if you're doing all the talking, you're then probably staying in that more mentoring mode. Whereas if you are then flicking on that continuum over into the coaching side, what do you need to do? How do you get that balance right between talking and listening and what you do? And then a couple of reflection questions for you. What went well? Think about whether it's a structure piece, whether it's a questioning approach, whether it's how you told a story. Take the time to reflect, and it's only going to take you a couple of minutes after every session. But also think about, and the next time I'm mentoring, I'd like to do more of this. So again, it's reflecting on perhaps where there are, things that you want to gap up or things that you want to do differently. And the question that I always try to ask myself every time, what significant difference can you make to your approach next time you mentor? So we really start to adopt that, continuous improvement approach to mentoring, because it should be as much about learning for us and an experience for us as it is for all of our mentees. So that is the end really of the formal part of the presentation today. We've built in plenty of time for questions before Laura wraps up the session today on behalf of Meet Business Women. So I'd really just like to open the floor now. If there's any questions or anything that anybody would like to ask about mentoring or some stories, then I'll turn the screen down and come on camera so you can see me there. Hi, Laura. Okay, so yeah, over to anybody that's on the call. If there's anything that you would like to ask, or if you've got any experiences of your own that are really great that you'd like to share, or any top tips that you'd like to give to everybody else. Don't be shy. You're all probably gasping for a cup of tea now and wrapping up the day. Okay, if there's nothing that anybody wants to ask, I'm really happy if anybody wants to follow up separately, if you want to have any questions at all, that's fine. So Laura, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Nikki. What a session. And there's just so much amazing content in there, even just some of the signposts to some of the websites, brilliant stuff that I didn't even know existed. So we're just so grateful for your time, and so you see the messages coming through from the delegates already about loving it. So thank you so much. And as Penny probably said at the beginning of the session, if anyone's not a member of Meet Business Women, looking down the list, I think the majority of the folks are on the call please do consider joining us. We're a friendly community, a passionate community, and also if you are a member and you haven't yet taken the step onto the mentoring portal, please do, because yeah, Nikki, from what we've seen today, you've tooled us up amazingly to to get going with it. And then there's just another point to note. Nikki's kindly running a mentee session on Friday. So if any of your contacts or any of your teams would like to be involved in that, please do sign up. And it's open to anyone. You don't actually need to be a Meet Business Women member as well. So if you've got anyone in your network that's thinking, I'm not sure if that's for me, and male, female, it doesn't matter, that are welcome to join, and you can see Nikki and I again. But as Nikki said, we would love your feedback, and in terms of if we should be doing more of these, or and all the rest of it. But we'll put the recording and the slides on the website as well, because I know I missed the beginning of it, but I'm definitely going to go back through it all because there's so much to learn. So thank you, Nikki. What are your reflections on this session? Because you do this all the time.
Yeah, so I think every time I'm involved in doing something like this, it just really energizes me, and I think that's great, because I kind of resonate on that for a really long time. I think it's fantastic that so many people have given up their time and have shown such an interest in mentoring, because, as I said at the beginning, it's not that I'm biased, but it is such, you can just use it for so many things, and it's such a privilege. And if you draw satisfaction, from seeing somebody learn, develop, progress as a result of that, that is just fantastic. And they're singing on their own because you've helped them get that ownership of their career and their development. And yeah, that just, that's something that I just find so rewarding to do.
Definitely, I know. And I thought I was doing a good job of a mentor, but the bits that I've seen, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm not doing any of that. So yeah, definitely a lot to learn from me as well. So a great session. So thank you so much. As Nikki said, as with all these things, if you reflect and you jump off this call and you've got any questions, just come back to us and we'll answer them. And we want to make sure you guys feel really comfortable to get on the platform and get mentoring. So thank you so much, Nikki. I'll see you on Friday for the mentee session, and everyone else, as I say, please spread the word.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Bye
Thanks,
now.
everyone. Have a great night. Cheers. Bye.